Joshua Medcalf. Joshua, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Joe.
This is a fantastic opportunity for us, and as I said, I have to thank my friend Tara who introduced me to your material, and I've been reading and reading as much as I can, and I'll be able to forward this interview to her later today, so I thank Tara for introducing us, and why don't I let you tell us what you consider your job to be, because I looked at your bio, and it seems to be a little unconventional. To be honest, it's something that drew me to you, right, to kind of give you a different idea. You called yourself a professional storyteller in one of the bios, an entrepreneur, but how do you see yourself?
Really, how I see myself is I just try and focus on loving people, encouraging people, and I believe that telling stories is one of the most beneficial ways that you can do that. But very similar to what Pete Carroll talked about in his interviews after the Super Bowl. I try and love people to death. I try and believe in them. I try and encourage them, and I've seen some really cool stuff happen whenever you can make people feel loved and valued unconditionally for who they are as people outside of what they do. And then the cool part is, like C.S. Lewis talks about, when we put those first things first, which loving people, serving people, making them feel appreciated and valued for who they are as a person, then those second things are not suppressed. Those second things actually increase. And so for me, it's really, I'm focused on putting hearts first and then letting performance take care of itself, because performance is a byproduct.
And that's consistent with some of the things that I've read, and it seems to be counter to a lot of what's popular out there. Pete Carroll now with the Super Bowl win is getting a lot of exposure for that philosophy. But have you seen a lot of resistance as you try to get that message across?
I've seen a little bit of resistance. I haven't seen a ton. I've actually been a little bit surprised at the lack of resistance, because I think that fundamentally, at our core, human beings have a deep desire to be loved and valued for who they are as people. And so, honestly, a lot of what we're trying to do is to, we wrote an article today that was kind of a mesh up of, a bunch of people that we believe are truth seekers and that are sharing God's wisdom and basically telling people how God really feels about them. And that's what I think people really need at their core, is they just need to know that they're unconditionally loved and that they're incredibly valuable for who they are, like just as human beings. And whenever that happens, like I said, some really, really cool stuff ends up taking place.
You mentioned storytelling, and we don't do a lot of biography and going back and telling everyone's story here. We focus on content, and we're certainly going to do that today. But I think your story is too unique to kind of pass up. And 37 and change thousand Twitter followers, and a successful blog, and a lot of different things happening. So you're getting your story out there. How do you get to be from a college soccer player to where you are today? What's your story?
Well, really, my story was, I had played at Vanderbilt. They cut our program after my third year in the soccer program. And from there, I hung up my cleats. I ended up going out for the club soccer team like 8 months later, and got cut by the club soccer team. And then 3 months later, get a phone call from Duke, and the number one team in the country is interested in me coming to play for them. And so I, by the grace of God, get a full ride scholarship to play on the number one team in the country. Then I get there. I find myself the last pick on the team during pickup games. And at that same time, I was taking a sports psychology class with Greg Dale. And Greg Dale tells us he thinks sports are over 70% mental. I think that's absolutely crazy, because nobody's ever taught me anything about mental training. But at that point, I was really desperate. So I decided to apply what he taught me. And in a very short time, I went from being the last pick on the team to finishing second in points, to being the first ACC player of the week at Duke, and having never scored a goal with my head, to scoring 2 goals against 2 of the top teams in the country after visualizing it. From there, I asked myself what I would do if money didn't matter, and for the first time in my life, it was serve people, which was a pretty radical idea for me, because I was a very selfish person and didn't really like when we did humanitarian or community service events. And So for the first time, rather than go to law school, I decided to skip on scholarships to law school, move across the country into a city where I knew no one here in Los Angeles. I moved into a homeless shelter, did a 6-month volunteer internship there. From there, I moved into the closet of a gym, was a sports director at a local church, and that's how I started my organization. And really, ever since I left Duke, I've really just focused on, loving people, serving people, providing value. My business partner, Jamie Gilbert, who's my lead trainer, we just shot a video this last week, and in it, the first time he asked me what our business plan was, I laughed, and I was like, we don't have a business plan. We just focus on loving people, serving people, providing value. And to us, this isn't a job. Like, I don't have a job. I don't get up and feel like I go to work. I get up and I pursue the passions that I believe God's placed in my heart. And really, at the end of the day, try and provide for athletes, coaches, parents, teachers, business people, the stuff that I wish I would have had whenever I was growing up. And, whether that's mentorship, whether that's emotional support, whether that's mental training strategies, whatever it is, but really try and be and provide those tools that we wish we would have had growing up. And so that's all I focused on, is love people, serve people, provide value. Like I said, I asked myself what I would do if money didn't matter. And so that's never been a focus. Yet now, I'm so grateful and incredibly humbled and honored at some of the opportunities that I get to work with some of the top coaches and athletes and business people around the world. And but also, one of the cool things that happened whenever I was in the closet of the gym, and I call this the day that everything changed for me, was I was really frustrated, and I felt like at that point that I could help, just about anyone. And so, I'm literally living in the closet of a gym, like a real closet. And I just remember one day I was in the gym and I just yelled out at God, and I was like, why do I only have 3 athletes that I'm working with? I could help, Tiger Woods, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. And, why do I only have 3 athletes? And I really just felt so deep in my heart him say, until you value those 3 athletes the same way that you would Kobe Bryant, Tiger Woods, LeBron James, you'll never work with that caliber of an athlete. And from that day forward, I really just tried to love those kids and treat them the way that I would if they were, the best athletes in the world. And so, now today I do get to work with some athletes and coaches that have a slightly higher public profile, but really still try and focus on treating all the athletes and the coaches and people that I get to work with as if they are, at the very, very top of their field. And it's been really cool to see the impact that's had in their life, the impact that it's had in my life, and kind of to see all the different opportunities that have come because of it.
Wow. Right off the bat, our mantra here is try to add value to the conversation, and there's just a tremendous amount to unpack there. And this is the kind of material that after today, after our interview, hopefully people will go out and seek out your material, because I encourage everyone to go out and see you actually speak in person. From all accounts, it's an incredible experience, and you have plenty of material to really give the longer version that story definitely justifies. 2 things I want to highlight for our listeners is that you lived in a homeless shelter, and the courage of your convictions to kind of really go after it. And now, you have the opportunity to go and you work with people of a slightly higher profile, but doesn't seem to be much difference. What are some of those great teams that you get a chance to work with today, just to give our listeners an understanding of where you're currently working?
Well, get to work with a lot of great teams, so I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. So I'll say that on a consistent basis, and at schools that I have titles at UCLA as the director of mental training for the women's basketball program there. And then with Oregon women's golf, I have the same title as the director of mental training for them. And then I'm in negotiations with USC and Lindsay Monday to take over as the director of mental training for their 3-year-old lacrosse program. So, and the cool part is that, whenever you're focused on hearts and you're not focused on performance, then it allows you to work with a lot of different schools within the Pac-12.
Yeah, and it sounds very exciting. I just wanted to give our listeners an understanding of where you're coming from. Let's dive into some of your core beliefs that you kind of fostered over the years. One of the things that kept coming up when I looked at your material was a quote or a comment that said, "Burn your goals." And I want to read you a quote and see how you feel about this, because this was a quote I found to be extremely typical of what we hear. This is a high-profile coach talking about how important goals are, and I want to see how you respond to this. Winning teams are goal-oriented. They win consistently because everyone connected with them concentrates on specific objectives. Winning teams are goal-oriented. I wanted to hear how that responds and how that works with your philosophy.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of coaches that feel that way, and it tends to be rare, I'll say this, that a coach has actually heard us lecture and have conversation with us about burning your goals, that they don't go, you know what, that actually makes a lot of sense. Because at the end of the day, like let's take the NBA, for example. Do you think that there's a program inside of the NBA that isn't focused on winning a championship?
No, I don't.
Okay. So they all have the same goal. Yet, how many teams win a championship every year?
Just one.
Just one. So they all have very similar goals. So it's really hard for me to believe that it's goals that are what separate the great teams from the mediocre teams. Everybody sits around at the beginning of the year and says, we want to be the best team in the country. We want to be the best team in the world. So to me, that's kind of like a wish list. And, for me, I got so tired of this because, when you work with hundreds of athletes around the world, you start to hear the same stuff over and over again. And so one of my girls at Oregon actually texted me a picture of her goals, and I just responded, I want you to burn that. I was like, I'm not interested in your wish list. I'm interested in your commitment list. I'm interested in, what you're willing to do inside of your 86,400 seconds every day to close the gap between where you're at and where you want to be. I'm interested in what you're willing to sacrifice inside of your 24 hours a day to become the type of person that you want to become. And those things are controllable. If we focus 100% of our energy on controllables, then all of a sudden, we do actually have a chance to close that gap. For the people that are focused on goals, and if the goal is what's driving you and the goal is to win a championship, well, then what happens when you start the season and you're, 2-10? Or, in the NBA, what happens if you're 13-35? Or, in baseball, if you come out and you're 20-60, then what happens to the process? What happens to the thing that's actually driving that goal? Because now your goal is not achievable. It's almost, numerically unattainable. So then what happens? And really, I think what goals are doing is they're actually encouraging us to kind of become worse people, and they're conditioning us to become worse people. Because if I'm focused on this end goal, and my end goal is winning or losing, something that's outside of my control, then it's probably going to elicit some less than beneficial behaviors in the pursuit of that goal. But if I'm focused on true mental toughness, and the way we define true mental toughness at Train to Be Clutch is having a great attitude, giving your very, very best, treating people really, really well, having unconditional gratitude, regardless of your circumstances. If that's what we're focused on, number one, John Wooden said, I've yet to meet a cynic that can describe for me, what is better than giving your best. So it's not like we're lowering the bar for anyone. We're asking you to give your very, very best, but we're also having you focus on doing that regardless of your circumstances, regardless of whether you're down by 10 runs or you're up by 10 runs. It's not about the outcome. It's about the process of who you become through that experience. So rather than focusing on these outcome-based goals that we can't control, because you can give your very, very best and lose, and you can give less than your best and win. And so I find that a lot of times in sports and school, we're actually putting the emphasis on the wrong things. We're talking about grades. We're focusing on grades instead of learning. We're focused on winning and losing instead of, the process that drives that and who we become. And nobody wants to work for a boss that only has a good attitude whenever everything's going well. Nobody wants a teammate who only gives their best whenever they're starting. Nobody wants somebody who's only grateful whenever they're playing really well. We don't want to be in any type of relationship with those types of people. Yet if we're focused on winning and losing, and that's where our goals are, then I believe that's what we're conditioning out of people. I mean, we talk about it all the time. You see it on ESPN. You see it on all tons of sports networks. When Dwight Howard smiles when his team's losing, people freak out on him and tell him that he's not competitive, that he shouldn't be, getting paid what he's getting paid, and that it's just a big joke. And I really think that we got to take a really hard look at whether sports are actually transformational right now in this country. And I would argue that for the majority of people, they are transformational in a negative way. They are not transformational in a beneficial and constructive way. But if we're focused on true mental toughness, then we can start to use our sport as an obstacle course to train us to become the type of people that we want to become. And like I said, again, with putting first things first and second things aren't suppressed, they increase. That golfer that I had burn her goals. 3 weeks later, she went out and blew out the field in New Mexico and shot 12 under and won by 5 strokes. So, if we just focus on those controllables, it's not like we're going to sacrifice results. We're probably going to get better results, but we're going to condition ourselves to become the type of people that we want to become actually in that process. And here's the thing with outcome-based goals is that they actually increase pressure, which most people don't perform better under pressure. They decrease our confidence, and they make us miserable in the process. None of those things are good for your heart, and they're definitely not good for your performance.
You're listening to Joshua Medcalf here on KWB TV, traintobeclutch.com. So the golfer or anyone else that you've worked with that you've had that transformational process with, what would you like to see, or what do you end up seeing when they come back to you with a commitment list? What would it look like that would be better than a list of goals?
I mean, the stuff that they can control. So how much time are you spending on your short game? How much time are you spending watching highlight film of yourself? How much time are you spending doing those things that are the processes that drive the results? Because so many people have the wish list of, I want to play in the MLB. I want to play Division I sport. I want to be the successful entrepreneur. But when you get behind the scenes and you actually look at the people that have achieved those things and have become those types of people, I mean, they're doing a ton of stuff. They're doing a ton of training. Probably my favorite story, and a guy that I definitely have unbelievable amounts of respect for him as a person and an athlete is Kevin Durant. And right now in the NBA, he's balling out more than anybody. And what he does with his time is pretty incredible. When Kevin Martin got traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder, he decided he wanted to try and be the first in, last out, and he showed up to practice 3 hours beforehand. And what he found was, Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook soaked in sweat on the court 3 hours before practice starts. Like, that's the type of, hustle and grind and using your 86,400 seconds in a way that's going to help close that gap between where you're at and where you want to be. It's not, I don't believe in luck. I went and gave a presentation to all the women's college golf coaches, and my good friend Lisa Strom of Ohio State, she said to me beforehand, she was like, good luck. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't need luck. I'm well trained. And, I don't believe in luck. I believe in training. And so, yeah, I mean, but most importantly, I mean, I want us to do stuff that is not making people miserable. Like, I was just at a golf tournament, and one of the golfers tried to have a philosophical debate with me after, her round, and it was about some of these concepts. And I just looked at her and I was like, how's your strategy working out for you? And she dropped her head and she was like, it's not. And I was like, okay, so like, I'm not here to debate. Like, you're struggling, you're miserable, your way is not working. So there's got to be something else out there. And that's what I find over and over again with athletes is that most of them are miserable. There's a ton of coaches out there that are miserable. And so, I just started working with a lady on the LPGA the other day, and I told her, I was like, look, I don't care if you don't ever hit a golf ball better. I just don't want you to be miserable anymore. And, after a month, she's a lot less miserable. I'd say she's closer to thriving. And guess what's happening on the golf course? She's hitting the ball better. Like, it's not rocket science, but we have to put those first things first. And so, I mean, that's ultimately what I care about. one of the girls at UCLA that's like my little sister. We were out to dinner with some people after a game one time, and our trainer was there too. And I looked at the girl that I mentor, and I said, if you told me tomorrow that you didn't want to play basketball anymore, what would I say to you? And she was like, that's cool, whatever. And I was like, good, I'm glad that you know that. Because until they know how much we care about them and that we care about them so much more as people than how they hit, kick, or throw a ball, then I think we're setting ourselves up for failure, and we're sending people the wrong message. We're sending them the message that their value comes from what they do and not who they are. And I think what they need to hear more than anything else, and not just hear it, but they need to believe it, they need to experience it, is that their value comes from who they are and not from what they do.
So much good information there to unpack. And I heard you say process. I heard you say work ethic and things like that. I never heard the other W word, and that's winning. And John Wooden and some of the UCLA tradition that you follow in makes no secret about it. He never mentioned it. He rarely mentioned it, and those type of process-oriented coaches. But you have a tweet that I read recently that said some people think that meth is the most addicting drug, but for you it was winning. Now that basically was one of the reasons I was attracted to you as a speaker, is that you're a straight shooter. I mean, and that's a powerful comment, that winning is the most addictive drug in the world. With that in mind, I mean, why is it such a bad thing? Because you have these players who it's just so hard to turn it off, to say, I'm not going to try to win. How do they learn to trust that process?
Well, I mean, to me, a lot of people that are really close to me will tell you that I'm the most competitive person that they know. So it's not about not competing. It's just about focusing on the stuff that allows us to actually use our sport and that actually drives results. So, I mean, the really interesting thing, and, maybe Wooden had selective memory. I don't know that to be the case, but he actually, before our games, they have this thing that comes on the scoreboard, and it's his voice, and it types out the quote of his. And he says that you would not be able to find a single player that ever heard him mention winning. And yet he won more than any other coach in college basketball. And, I think it was, 4 years in a row that they, didn't lose a game. But yet he was never talking about it. And so he was asking a ton from his players. He held his players to the highest standards. He was demanding their very best. He didn't even call it, work ethic. He called it industriousness, because of how much he was asking out of his players. But he was completely focused on the process, because the process is what drives results. And so I'm a highly, highly competitive person. Jamie Gilbert's uncle, we were playing cards over Thanksgiving, and he called me a competitive freak. So it's not that I'm not competitive. It's not that I'm, teaching people to not compete. I'm just teaching them to focus on the things that actually drive results, and that's the process.
Wow. So when you unpack that process a little bit, when you work with your athletes, what does it look like when they get there? If you can follow it, what kind of behaviors will you see when they get there? If they're not working at the end result and they're working at the process, what do you see from your athletes that makes you know that they're on the right track?
One of the biggest things that we see right away is they start reading a lot. They just start reading stuff that a lot of athletes don't understand, that sports really are over 70% mental. And so if that's the case, then you really need to be developing your mind and seeking out the strategies of the people that have come before you and that have achieved their dreams. And so what's one of the best ways of doing that? Reading. If you could spend 30 minutes a day with Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Abraham Lincoln, Steve Jobs, the Warren Buffett, the list could go on and on. I think most people would say that they would love to do that, and then that would drastically change the way that they think. And yet there's interviews on YouTube of Warren Buffett and Jay-Z, and that's an hour long by Steve Forbes, that it's got less than 100,000 views on it. And there's autobiographies of all those people that I mentioned, and there's ways that you can actually spend time with them every single day. and that will change the way that you think. My pastor is Judah Smith, and I listen to him every single day for at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours. I didn't run to Judah the first time I met him and said, Judah, can you mentor me? Like, he's got tools out there. So I read both of his books, and I listened to his audio, and I try and listen to those things, because I know that's going to impact how I think, how I see the world, and how I behave. And so that's one of the biggest things right away that we see is our athletes start reading a lot more. But then overall, we just start to see them change drastically what they do with their 24 hours a day. One of the coolest stories that happened came from a guy that followed me on Twitter, and a year ago he came out and he heard me speak in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And at that time, he'd been trying to get a job in coaching, like he's trying to get a different job, and he got turned down for the job at this prestigious high school. And this year, that the coach that had turned him down called him up and said, hey, I want you to come in and work for our program. He said, I've been watching you for the last year, and what you do with your time is completely different. The way you treat people is completely different. Whatever it is that you have, we want you to bring it into our program. And that's somebody that just came and heard me speak for 2.5 hours and was really convicted about how I used his 24 hours a day, and started drastically changing, his focus and, what he was striving towards. And he started becoming mission driven instead of being goal driven. He started reading a ton. And as a natural byproduct, all of a sudden, there was a lot of people that were actually impacted and were watching that transformation take place. And so we tend to see that happen quite a bit.
Short answer, Joshua. 3 or 4
Yes.
titles that you would recommend right away for people after they get done. What should they pick up?
The first one is mindset. The second one is In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. The third one is How to Stop the Pain.
Okay, I know the Dweck book, but I don't know the other two, so I have some reading on my list.
Yeah, and then it varies from there. But if you reach out to me, any of the listeners, I'll send you different things that you can read. And there's great books like Inner Excellence from my friend Jim Murphy. There's tons of books. It just depends on kind of what your field is. Anything that Wooden has written. Wooden on Leadership is great. We have 33, I think, books that are on our leaders reading challenge that we put out. And so yeah, there's tons of stuff out there that's just phenomenal content.
Well, you've been extremely accessible via Twitter and email. How do people get in touch with you to continue this conversation once we're done here today?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is probably actually through Twitter at Joshua Medcalf. But you can also go to our website, www.traintobeclutch.com. And yeah, I mean, you can send an email through that. Those emails tend to come to me, and so we can send you lots of free tools. I mean, our big thing is we just want to train and equip people with the resources that they need. And so, we put out tons of free content all the time. One of my friends that coaches at a major Division I school, he said, one of the funny things is I've watched you over the last year since we met. And he said, it's funny because you tend to interact as much with the random people on Twitter as you do the high profile coaches. And, to me, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you send me an email and you want tools, like, I want to put those tools in your hands, and, not asking you to give us any money. Like, we just create a ton of MP3s, articles, and videos, and anything that we can do to provide people from all different walks of life, and people that have different resources and incomes, the type of tools that, once again, that we wish we would have had growing up, and that we wish our coaches and parents would have had as leaders growing up.
Well, if I've learned anything from this talk, I know that you're not results driven, so it's not that 37,000 and plus Twitter followers. I'm sure that doesn't impress you to where you're headed. I'm sure it's impressive, but vision driven, and you're looking to continue to influence more and more people. The free content has been amazing. If you were going to sit down with an athlete today, someone reaches out today and says, what's 1 or 2 things that I could do tomorrow to improve my game, whatever sport it might be, whether it be baseball or another sport, what kind of conversation would you have with them?
A very similar conversation to what we've just had, to let go of outcome-based thinking, to really just enjoy it. And there was a golf coach that just passed away recently from Auburn, one of the assistants. And I think that so often we undervalue the experience and the journey that we get to have with people. And I know that there are probably people in her life that wish that they could go back and not have cared about the fact that they shot a 79 one day, that they would just be appreciative and have a whole different perspective on how they got to spend time with her. And I think that's what it's all about, is just learning to enjoy the journey. Whenever I was 9 years old, not to be dramatic, but I pulled my little brother out of the pool, and he drowned, and ended up passing away 3 months later. And then whenever I was 22, my father passed away from cancer. And so from a very young age, I've really tried to make it a focus of mine to really be appreciative of everything that God's given me, and not wait until something else drastic happens, that I get diagnosed with cancer, or that I have to lose somebody that I've coached or played with, to really spend that quality time with them, and to really have remembered what was the most important thing. And so one of the exercises I have coaches and players do is, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want to be written in your obituary? And if you focus on that and really thinking about that, you'll find that nobody wants to win more games. Nobody wants to have made more money. They remember, and they want to be remembered for personal characteristics and deep relationships. And so if we know what first things first looks like, and so that's where we got to start. And if we start there, there's tons of cool techniques and tools that I'm sure lots of people have shared with you and many other athletes out there. But once again, until athletes know that you care about them, and until they are really focused on putting those first things first, then everything else, to me, it's kind of a moot point. And so really just have him focus on putting first things first, letting go of results, focusing on, enjoying it, breathing, stopping the negative self-talk and using beneficial and constructive self-talk, having powerful and positive body language. I can't believe I just said positive on air. Never used that word. Powerful body language. And then, whenever they catch themselves negatively visualizing, really stopping that and using, beneficial and constructive visualization. I think we're all experts in mental training. Most of us just do it in really negative ways. So, we worry all the time. We have negative self-talk all the time. We're all experts in mental training. We just do it in the wrong ways. So if we would stop those behaviors and start to be our own best coach and, visualize being at our best and overcoming obstacles, instead of constantly visualizing being at our worst and responding out of our flesh and things like that, like a lot of that stuff's going to naturally take care of itself. If you were 100 pounds overweight, if you change what you put in your system and you change your exercise habits, a lot of the health problems that you've had have just been a byproduct of being extremely overweight. And so we find it's the same thing with mental training, that if we start to be really careful about the fuel that we put in our heart of, what we watch, what we listen to, what we read, who we surround ourselves with, and how we talk to ourselves, that a lot of the challenges that we've been having have been nothing but byproducts, and those things just naturally take care of themselves.
Joshua, I can't think of a better place to end our conversation, but I know that this is something that I'm going to watch again, and hopefully our viewers can do the same. I can't thank you enough for being with us, and they have all the information where to find you and continue the conversation after we're done here today. Joshua Medcalf, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Joe. It's been my blessing. Hope you all have a wonderful night.
And Joshua Medcalf and everyone on KWB TV, until next time, Kevin will be back with us next Sunday, and we thank Joshua for being with us. Until next time, good batting.